It can't happen soon enough.
NHS England has today found that the death of a teenager who died after being given an antipsychotic drug following a seizure against his parents' wishes was potentially avoidable. Oliver McGowan, who had epilepsy, was 18 when he died. Since then, the family have been campaigning for the NHS to acknowledge it was at fault and for the rules to be changed for people with learning disabilities. Let's talk to Oliver's parents, Paula and Tom McGowan, who join us now from New South Wales, where they live. Thank you very much for talking to us. Paula, Tom, how do you react to the conclusion of this review?
Well, we're very pleased to see, this response because, it means a lot for us as a family, a lot for Oliver. It's what we know, but the bigger picture is what's more important. This matters to saving the lives of learning disabled people.
It's welcome news. There was a first report which was altered, and we have now come to the conclusion we should have come to the first time, which, as Paula said, we've always known. But it's good to actually, it's a bittersweet sort of feeling because, it's good to have it acknowledged because it's what we already knew. It's just painful that we've had to spend the best part of 3 years getting to this point, really.
Why do you say that this will help protect the lives of those with learning disabilities in the future, Paula?
Well, the LEADER programme is all about learning. It's about when things go wrong, it's for clinicians and social care staff to learn from the mistakes that have been made and to take those learnings forward into practice. We have well over 1,200 preventable deaths in learning disabled people every single year, and they are dying due to inequality of healthcare. So we need to address that, but address it with meaningfulness. We need the government to really embrace this. We need NHS England to take ownership of any lessons to be learned, and we need that fed down into the hospital trusts.
We are advocates of the process. It's the only real tool to actually try and identify real lessons. But we need those lessons to be learned. We've had 4 annual LEADER reports, and the statistics haven't really changed from each of those reports.
No.
And we're hoping that Oliver's recommendations, which are quite far-reaching, if implemented correctly, will make real, meaningful change over time. Yeah. But they need to be adopted in their entirety and completely.
Indeed. Can I ask you to tell our audience who are watching right around the world right now what happened to Oliver back in 2016 when he was 18, for those who want to learn more about your son?
Well, Oliver, he was a great lad. He was having a great life, but as a result of meningitis as a baby, he had what we call focal seizures, so almost absence-type seizures. And we were told when Oliver had clusters of these seizures that we must bring him to hospital, which is exactly what we did. Put him in my mini car, took him to hospital. But because Oliver was quite rightly anxious and scared in hospital, and he would revert back to his normal autistic behaviours, the doctors absolutely misunderstood those behaviours to be a mental health condition, maybe. And instead of making reasonable adjustments, which is what the law says to do, the Autism Act, their first response was to use chemical cosh, and they gave Oliver olanzapine, which is an antipsychotic drug. Used in the correct way, it's very effective, but used in the wrong way, off-label, it can have detrimental and far-reaching consequences.
And used on people with autism, really. It can help mental health conditions. We're not saying it can't, but it's not right, really, to use those types of medications for people with autism.
As a consequence, Oliver reacted really, really severely to that medication. And, we then kept a diary. And when he went into the last hospital, we presented that diary showing them Oliver's reactions to that drug and what other doctors had said. And Oliver himself had made it really clear to clinicians that he was not to be administered any antipsychotic drugs. And we were, as Oliver's advocates, we said exactly the same thing.
He had documented intolerances to that drug. We highlighted it. We showed them previous documented evidence to that effect, but unfortunately that was ignored.
I mean, can you? I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom. How could it be ignored? An 18-year-old boy was telling them, and so were his parents.
Exactly, and that's the harshness and the unfairness of this, because doctors are the decision makers in that situation. Oliver was just turned 18, but he's 18, so he's classed as an adult. Therefore, the doctors have the right to make those decisions. But however, there are acts like the Mental Capacity Act, where they are supposed to listen to families and patients, and unfortunately, those were ignored. And that is recorded and reported on in this report as well. They do call out the Mental Capacity Act, the Autism Act, and the Human Rights Act.
But as you've both said, Oliver was mildly autistic. He had a learning disability. None of those are mental health issues. So why would he be given an antipsychotic drug?
Because this is what's happening to autistic and learning disabled people right across the UK, really. You know, can you imagine, Victoria, going into hospital, you know what's right for you and what's wrong for you, and you tell clinicians that actually you are not to be administered a certain drug. But if you have a label attached to your being, for some reason your voice does not count. But not only your voice, but the voice of your family and advocates. And, you know, this is exactly why so many learning disabled people are dying from preventable deaths.
You know, statistically, it's acknowledged that statistically you are 27 years earlier likely to die purely because you've got a disability. And that's fact. That's fact-based. There's lots of statistics around this and studies, and we've seen it. And it's not just in the UK, it's actually quite common around the world. But, you know, it's what needs to change, culture as well, culture to people with disabilities. And, you know, that's why we're happy to try and get Oliver's story out there and use it in every way it can to try and raise the awareness.
Absolutely. If you can, you know, if you can protect the lives of others, of other people with learning disabilities, then that is something. But I, you know, it is unimaginable for most people watching that you know, you bring a little boy into the world, you get him through primary school, you get him through secondary school, he's on the cusp of being an adult, and then he's taken from you. I mean, that is just absolutely heartbreaking.
Especially when you put all the foundations in place, you know, and you ensure that everything's going to be right for him, and you're making him be the best adult he can possibly be. And, you know, we know this stuff and we pass it on to the clinicians. We knew him best. But sadly, Victoria, I've got to say, it appears to me, my opinion, that if you have a learning disability and or autism in this country, your life doesn't seem to be seen as equal as everybody else's. And sadly, Oliver is a testament to that.
It's a statistic, unfortunately, because it's not uncommon. When it first happened, you know, you have those thoughts, we're not different, we're not special, but why did it happen to us? I mean, every parent in this situation must go through that same sort of emotion. And real pain was when you start to read around it, you begin to realise very quickly that, you know, Oliver's story is so common. It's one of many. And it's wrong. And it needs to change. And that's why we're having to try and get the story out there as much as possible.
Well, I'm very grateful that you've spoken to us today, and that photograph behind you of your son is absolutely magnificent, I have to say. It has dominated the picture of what we see of you today, so thank you for that, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very much, Paula. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paula and Tom McGowan, the mum and dad of Oliver.